Hey, welcome back to the Media Maker. I'm Dr. Dave Harris. Glad you could join us. We're using Photoshop today. Photoshop is a great tool for doing all kinds of things with images, whether it be blemish removal, rehashing images, joining images together, and really affecting reality. And that's what we're going to be doing today. If you want to go ahead and join me on the screen, I've got this image that I found on Morguefile, one of my favorite sites for finding free images. And this is a place in London called King's Crossing. And one of the things I look at as I look at this image is I think, you know, this is a really black area of this image. And wouldn't it be nice if we had a little bit more going on up here in this area? I don't want to totally detract from this, but hey, maybe I will. We'll see. I also have this image of the moon. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if we just took this image of the moon and we put it right up here in the sky and we did some fun stuff with it? So we're going to do exactly that. I'm going to go ahead and pull this tab out. As I pull that tab out, it allows me to then drag that moon right onto this other image. I'm going to use my Move tool to do that. I'm going to hit V on the keyboard, which is going to select my Move tool. And I'm just going to take that moon image and I'm just going to drag it over to the other image that I have from London. Now I'm done with that moon image, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to use a shortcut command tilde, which is going to bring me back to this document, and I'm just going to close it. What we've done now is we've added this layer that is the moon layer to our background layer, which is this King's Crossing layer. I'm going to go ahead and practice good Photoshop etiquette. I'm going to rename that layer Moon so that I know exactly what it is. And what I want to do is I want to position this moon in the sky in an area that I think would look pretty good. But because the moon is so large, because it's got a lot of this black sky around it, I can't see underneath. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce the opacity of this layer. Over here in the Layers palette, I'll click the word opacity and start to drag it to the left. And I'll bring it down to about 50%. And this allows me to see through the moon layer so that I can see the buildings and other things behind it. And then to position it, I'm going to use the transform mode of Photoshop. And I'll do that with Command T as the shortcut, or if you're on a PC, Control T. And now I'm in transform mode, and I can move the position of this layer by bringing my mouse inside the bounding box being the outline of the layer. As I bring my mouse cursor inside, I can move it around. I can also rotate it if I wanted to, bring the mouse cursor outside the bounding box. I could rotate it, but we probably ought to leave the moon alone. It doesn't want to be rotated too much. That man in the moon would be upside down. That would not be good. I can also resize by bringing my mouse cursor right onto any of these handles. We'll resize. So I'll use the bottom right handle, and I'm going to hold the Shift key down to constrain the proportions. Otherwise, I might end up stretching the moon like this, and it ends up being egg-shaped, and that's not at all what the moon should be like. So I hold that Shift key down, and that constrains those proportions. And I'm going to make this pretty big. We'll see if this is a little bit unnatural, but I don't know, maybe I'm feeling a little unnatural today. That's the way I want to be. So I'll make it about this big. I'll let go of the mouse button and then let go of the Shift button to ensure that I don't accidentally snap something to the wrong aspect ratio. This looks pretty good, but I'm going to go ahead and move it just a little bit up. I want it to be behind these buildings when I'm done, and I want it to not quite be off the side of the image right up in here. I'll hit the return key to accept my transform changes. And now what I want to do is I need to add what's called a layer mask to my moon layer. So a layer mask, the definition of a layer mask, it essentially says, okay, we've got pixels in a layer, and those pixels have color. And the color of those pixels determines what the image looks like, just like little dots of paint on an image. But we can also, with each of those pixels, we can say, not only do I want color information, I also want transparency information or opacity information, opposites that are essentially the same thing. So opacity information says, okay, you got color, now how transparent are you? And we can make pixels completely transparent. In the case of this image, as we have a look, we want to make all of these black pixels around the outside of the moon completely transparent. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a layer mask. Down here in the bottom right, underneath the Layers palette, I have a Layer Mask button. I want to make sure I have the moon layer selected, and I click Add Layer Mask. It adds an additional thumbnail to my moon layer, and this is a layer mask. The way the layer mask works is everywhere the layer mask is white, the pixels that are associated with that layer, which we would see over here, would be opaque, and we would see any colors that are associated with those pixels. Anywhere the layer mask is black, those pixels will be transparent, and we won't see those pixels at all. We could also have shades of gray, anywhere between black and white, and you'll have various levels of opacity or transparency. So I have the layer mask selected. I can tell because it has this frame around it. And I'm actually going to paint black on this layer. I'm going to choose black, or ensure that black is my foreground color. I can see it down here. And I'm going to use the paintbrush tool. Paintbrush tool is just for painting on solid color. You can see that I'm able to reduce this black area of the moon, which itself is already 50% opaque, but I can reduce it down to complete transparency, which is exactly what I want. Now, what about when I get over here? I'm going to go back to my move tool just so I can use it as a pointer. What about when I get through here? These are very, very sharp edges where these buildings are. Very, very sharp edges, and there's no way I'm going to do perfect with just a mouse to ensure that I just get these edges perfect. So what I want to do is I want to use a great feature of Photoshop, and that is to use a selection. I'm going to go ahead and zoom in using Command plus sign or Control plus sign, and I'm going to hold the space bar down to recenter my image in the document window. Now with a selection, the way a selection works in Photoshop is we define a selection which is going to be a complete, at least some sort of circle. It's going to be some complete shape. It could be a circle or an ellipse, or it could be a polygon. It can be all kinds of different shapes. But once we've enclosed a selection, we have that area that will be worked with Photoshop, and all the areas outside of the selection will not be affected by anything we do. Imagine it being like Microsoft Word. If you select a portion of your sentence using your mouse and then you push the delete key, it only affects that part of the document that you had selected. It doesn't delete the whole document, it just deletes that little bit that you had selected. It's the same thing with here in Photoshop. We define a selection, and then the area inside the selection is affected by what we do. Everything outside the selection is not affected at all. Let me show you what I mean. We're going to use a polygon selection tool. So as I click up here, third from the top, I have a lasso tool, polygonal lasso tool, and a magnetic lasso tool. All of these are means by which I can create a selection. But I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool because this will allow very, very straight lines. So I'll select it. And to start my selection, I'm just going to come down here to the lower left corner of where I believe this building would have this tower be here. It's hard to see because of the exposure of the image, but I can kind of see through here. If I was to hide this moon image, you can see I do have this tower, and I do have a little bit of this showing up. Some of this back here we may not have to worry about. I don't know if you can even see that on your screen. I can barely see it on my screen because of the exposure of the image. So I'm going to go ahead and just anticipate that the side of the building comes to about right here, and I'm just going to click and release the mouse. Then as I bring the mouse up, you can see I've got this line that's attached to my mouse. I'm going to bring it up and follow that line up to about the top of where this tower is. I'm going to follow around where the trim is on this tower. Come up here now, and every time I set a new point just by using a single click. So as soon as I feel like it's right in the exact location it needs to be, I just give it a single click and release the mouse. Right up and through here, it looks like it might come along through here. I've got this piece of trim right through here. Kind of an interesting shape to the building right through here. Looks to me like it comes up through here. Got a little bit of a window that comes out through here. And up the tower, then along through the trim right through here, and then right along here. Now, I'm only concerned about this area right through here that I need to worry about as far as that moon is concerned. But I also have to complete this selection. You can see I've got the ending point of my selection right down here, and I've got the starting point way over here where I began. So I'm just going to just draw just a couple of points down here that kind of make it so that I have a huge shape to work with. A couple ways I can complete this shape. I can come right here to my starting point. You get that little circle that shows up, or alternatively, I can just push the return or enter key on my keyboard, and that's going to take whatever was the last point and go back to the beginning point. And you can see now I have what Photoshop calls the marching ants. The marching ants are exactly what you think of from like a Tom and Jerry cartoon or something from the old days. These ants just kind of marching along and defining a selection for us. Now, everything that happens in Photoshop, as long as we have this selection, will only take place inside the selection. So I have my layer mask still selected down here, and I'm going to go back to my paintbrush, still have black as my foreground color, and you can see that no matter what I do, no matter what I paint on, even if I paint clear over here, the only part that's affected is that area inside the selection. So I can get a very, very nice crisp line right here, right as the building is here, because it's only going to paint that black or that transparency on the layer mask right there where that selection took place. Now to deselect, I'll hit Command D or Control D, that's going to deselect. I can look at this nice crisp line that's taken place. I'll hit Command 0, and that's going to zoom out my image to the full document area, and that looks really good. Now, in order to see my mask, because I can actually see some dark area right through here, I'm going to use the backslash key on my keyboard. The backslash key allows me to see the areas that are transparent. And we can see that I do indeed have this black area that's showing through. Now this is a part of the moon layer. So this red is defining the same thing as this layer mask here. Where it's red, it's transparent. So this layer, the moon layer, is transparent where this red is. So if I leave that red on, go back to my brush, I'll just hit B on the keyboard and continue to paint. Now black is what I want to paint. You can see it's changed to white. You can see I was starting to remove the mask. I do not want to do that. So I'll use a shortcut to trade the foreground and background colors. I'm going to use the X key on the keyboard. That'll allow me now to paint black. And I'm just going to paint black all the way through here. Now I'm not near as concerned about in through here, but I do want to make sure that it looks great here as well. I want to make sure that I've got no black showing up through there. So there we go. I've got a nice crisp line through here. All the rest of this is just transparent. I'm not too worried about it. I'm going to push the backslash key one more time to remove what looks like the mask. And then, man, I tell you what, we better just increase the opacity of this layer. And now we've got a nice, beautiful, huge moon up here where before we had black sky. But that's not enough. I'll tell you what, sometimes I'm a bit of a crazy guy. To me, the moon is kind of, I don't know, boring. It's just kind of grayscale. It's kind of white and gray, shades of gray. Couldn't we add a little flair to it? Let's do it. All right, we're going to use what's called an adjustment layer. Adjustment layers are down here in the layers palette. Click on the adjustment layer icon. It opens up the menu of adjustment layers. One of them is the hue saturation adjustment layer. Now what an adjustment layer does is it's going to add a specific special kind of layer to my layers palette. In this case, it's the hue saturation layer, but I know it's an adjustment layer because it has this icon. This icon says, okay, you have adjustments that you can make. And in my case, the adjustments are here in the properties panel. What the adjustment layer does is it affects all layers that are below the adjustment layer. So everything I do, every adjustment I make on the adjustment layer itself will affect every single one of these layers. Let me show you what I mean. If I scroll down here further into my properties panel and I click colorize, I need to click colorize because this moon has no color in it, so I actually have to colorize it. You can see that I've actually not only colorized the moon, but I've also colorized this King's Crossing building. That's because it's, even though it's 2 layers down, it's still below the adjustment layer. So I do not want to use this default use of the adjustment layer. I only want it to affect the layer just below it. So I'll right click on the adjustment layer words themselves. In my case, I'll scroll down and I want to select Create Clipping Mask. As soon as I do that, it adds this little icon and says, great, I will only make changes to the one layer below, nothing below that, and certainly nothing above that if I had any layers above that. Now with the adjustment layer selected, I can come to my properties panel and I can make changes to the hue of this, and maybe I want it to look a little blue, maybe a little purple. I'm thinking maybe a little purple. And then I can add color it. Saturation's a fancy word for how much color. I can add just a little bit more color to it. I end up with a really nice purple orb. Now, maybe I'm a little crazy, maybe it looks a little bit unnatural, but that's okay. We live in a crazy world. We live in an unnatural world, right? We can have purple moons if we want to. Who's to say we can't? Now, the nice thing about these layer masks is if we feel like this moon is maybe a little bit too big, we can actually adjust the size of the moon itself without adjusting the size of the layer mask, which is a great thing for us to do. If I come down here into the layers palette, I have the moon image itself, and then I also have the layer mask icon right here. I've got the chain link right here that chains them together, which if I was to do a transform on them or move one around, it's going to move the other around, which might be useful for us, but not in this case. So if I click on that chain and remove that chain, it breaks these free so that now I can move this portion of the image, the actual colored pixels themselves, and leave the mask alone. So I'll do that by selecting the pixels themselves, this portion of the thumbnail, and I'm going to put it in transform mode, Command T. As soon as I put it in transform mode, I can now move that moon around and notice that the layer mask itself stays put. And I can actually, if I really was getting crazy, I could be like, yep, there's the moon going down. Maybe we just want to have it sneaking back up there. Or maybe we do want it just a little bit smaller. Maybe it looks a little bit more natural. If it's smaller, people think, hey, that's a fake photo because that moon is super huge and you can't convince them otherwise. So you make it just a little bit smaller and maybe you can convince them that you found a purple moon. Or maybe there's smog or something in London and it just made it look like it's purple. I have no idea. You can tell whatever story you want, right? That's what we do. Now me, I'm gonna undo. I like my moon to be super huge. I like my moon to be purple. I like this image just like it is. And I'll tell you what, that's the beautiful part about Photoshop. Just do whatever you want. You want your moon to be purple, make it purple. You want to take up a whole screen, do it. But you gotta remember, you gotta convince people that it's a real image, and sometimes that can be hard. But I'll tell you what, I like this. This is great. Great things we could do. We rehashed an image, we affected reality, we put a moon where there wasn't a moon. We have no idea whether the moon could actually even be there in that position, but good gracious, we could say, hey, we went to London, we caught this great picture, and look at us, we're awesome. Thanks for joining me on the Media Maker. I hope you'll see me again sometime. We'll do some more stuff with Photoshop or Illustrator, everything. It'll be great. Take care.